Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Let's go.
Hey, Making Data Simple podcast. Al Martin here, the host. Again, another recording. I'm with Raffi Khatchadourian. Raffi is an account technical leader at IBM. We cross paths quite a bit, and he's proven to be extremely technical. He's who you want an account leader to be. And when I look at an account leader, I guess I make a mention here, and that's really a trusted technical architect. I think Raffi embodies that. So I thought I'd have a chat with him to see what's going on in the field. Thank you for being here, man. How you doing?
I'm great. I couldn't be better chatting with you. I think you showed me what discipline is every Wednesday coming
Really?
with your Making Data Simple podcast pre-pandemic. So that's cool. How many years later to still see not only it kicking, but the growth?
It's been going on this. I don't know. Every time I've said this before, but every time I try to get rid of it, or I think, hey, you know what? I need to take a break. I'll be like in Australia and somebody will say, oh, I heard that. I said, you listen to my podcast? You're in Australia? I'm like, oh my God. I feel like a commitment to people. It's like the obligation now. I got to keep it going. So hopefully I'm living up to the standard. But anyway, I've already got some questions. We'll talk about a whole bunch of different things. And I'll give the intro, what I think we're going to talk about. You'll have to tell me, but I want to allow you to have a quick chance to introduce yourself, if you would.
Yeah, thank you again for the quick intro. I'm right now at IBM as an account technical leader. Think of the role as a trusted advisor to clients. It's great to kind of lift my sleeves up and not just cover AI technology, which is a lot of where I came from. Spent maybe 9-10 years, even as an intern back at university at IBM and AI implementation. So I've gone through from lab services delivery to various roles in product, and most recently have had the ability to really just support clients, show up every day at a client site and understand their technology problems and how IBM technology and services can provide value there. So more background on myself, I will say, is I've been doing some research. So in college, I was very interested in econometrics, math, and science. I was the last one waiting around in labs, so I wasn't the best comp sci guy. So I appreciate you saying that my technical prowess is now superseding myself, because it took me some time, and Gen AI definitely along the way has helped out.
But wait a second. If you're the last guy, you're right. Maybe you don't get it, or else you're just an overachiever, trying to make your project better than everybody else's. I presume it's the latter. I know you well enough to know it's the latter.
Yeah, maybe I'm a hard judge, critic.
I think you might be a hard judge. I think so. You're just trying to get it right. Everybody else is going to the bar. That's what happened.
Yeah, we'll take that one. We'll take that one.
But what'd you graduate in again?
So I graduated, I went to a little liberal arts school at Colgate University upstate and studied mathematical economics. So really it was econ focused, but then kind of took those 300 or 400 level math classes that I had to sit in the front again to make it through. But really getting to see applied math and social sciences and zooming out of economic landscapes and how then the numbers influence really the economy and finances is where I spent time. And then I went to IBM, got to really experience hands-on early AI days, what that looked like, a lot of investments in both infrastructure, pre-cloud and hyperscalers, and got to see that journey along with clients in a big company.
How long have you been at IBM now?
I've been 9 years and 10 years if you jump to the internship as well.
And this your first company?
First company. I do have startup experience as well. So before kind of going into the quote unquote corporate world, I will say a couple of Watson commercials with Bob Dylan and Serena Williams definitely influenced my college decision there. But I dabbled while I was in university with some startups. And so that was really in like the music industry, looking at the data side of the music industry, how you can predict artists, with a company called Indify that's still kicking. Actually, funny enough, Friday, James Blake, who's one of my favorite artists, producers, he released an album through Indify, meaning Indify was like the venture partner. They found him investors and he released his music. So it's cool to still see that startup kicking. And since then, I've just kind of been an advisor, and I jumped fully into corporate because I was really interested in wider scale. How do you have a company with 100, 200, 300,000 people and actually influence change with technology? Obviously, that's an aspect, but the process and the people always interest me. I would love to one day be able to work at a company, not only at the scale, but manage groups and really understand how to motivate folks too.
Nice. Good answer, man. Your journey is probably no different than mine then. Physics 3, which is the theory of relativity, kicked my butt. But now quantum is probably more I mean, it's one of my most interesting subjects, and I just can't get enough of trying to read on quantum and the stuff we still can't explain. But so you go into AI, right? Look, I consider you an authority on AI. So yeah, I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. So I thought today, I think we're going to chat a little bit about AI, right? Implementation, system design.
Yeah, would love to just jump in to really talk about what I've seen, both from an actual client field perspective, but also from research, since I think tends to be a gap between industry and then academia and research. And within the last year or two, I've tried to bridge that a bit. But kind of going back, you were talking about quantum a bit, as well as your history in physics. What have you seen from your role when you look at AI deployment as a whole at IBM and outside with other startups?
Hey, who's the host here? Look, what I've seen, well, you know what I've seen, and this is kind of what we're set to chat about, and that is, I think clients predominantly know that they've got to use AI for automation and optimization, and they've got to get going relatively quickly, and they're going to get behind for every day that passes. However, they don't know how to do it. And I think we are still seeing in the market, every statistic you look at, which is probably accurate, will tell you like 80% of AI projects fail or don't see the light of day, something. And I think, as I've said on the podcast before, it's due to a number of different things. I mean, one is I think a lot of companies have huge ambitions. They sell those ambitions to the board, and they try to achieve those ambitions with one bite. And I think you got to start small, which isn't as sexy. But if you start small and then start building, that's where I see success. And I've said this, I was just at a conference that they asked me to keynote a couple of weeks ago, and they were asking me to talk about AI and implementation, kind of like, you just asked. And when I got up there, I oversimplified and I said, look, I think it's about people, process, and tooling. I'm a simple guy and I oversimplify. And I went through each one, but on the people, I'll give you an example. On the people, when I said, and I may have said this in a previous podcast or not, I can't tell. It's just like talking to people. You don't know what you repeat or what you don't. But anyway, I said, first of all, you got to figure out your value system. You should have a value system already, but then how does that translate to AI? And I said, I'll give you an example. The value system I hold, which also incidentally is what IBM holds, that's why I'm still here, is one is human in the loop. This is augmented intelligence, number one. Number two, data privacy, data is yours. And number three is everything that we do around AI should be explainable and transparent. And as I told the crowd, I said, the first reaction I'm probably going to get from everybody out there is you're going to tell me, yeah, sounds like my values too. And I don't believe it. I mean, I said, look, you really need to inspect your values. And I'll give you an example. And there's nothing against the frontier models. I use them too, mostly for like things I want to fix at home or something, but because they do really good with that. But if you're using a frontier model, that means they're not explainable. They're not transparent. They don't have fact sheets. You don't know where the data is coming from. You don't know how it's been trained. You can't look at the code. So my point is that wouldn't match my values for an enterprise level implementation of AI. Yet, I know some people are using it. No problem. Your value system may be different. It's all good. And we support those models, by the way. If that's your value system and that's what you decide to use, great. But I guess what I'm saying is you got to really understand what you're getting into and where you want to be with enterprise AI. I think IBM can do it better than anybody else. Again, that's why I'm still here. Can other companies do AI? Yes. There's companies all over. The frontier companies that do it, whether it's Anthropic, Microsoft, or otherwise. But what we do is enterprise AI. Somebody said AI for grownups the other day, because you're going to need security. You're going to need governance to make it work. And the one example I often ask clients is I say, hey, what happens if somebody turns off the lights? What do you mean by turn off the lights? Well, I mean, what if they say you can't have access to your data? What if they say they're going to triple your price? Are you still good? Are you still competitive? So you asked me, that's my answer, Raffi. Now, yeah, what's your answer? What's your answer?
I'll have to answer.
Don't steal mine either.
I will give you that answer. I will say, in terms of what it looks like, it's really about replayability. So I think you alluded to this. You've been on a lot of podcasts. How many podcasts have you had so far? What episode number are we at today?
Episode I'm at, you know what? I used to keep track, but it's gotten so big. I would say The last time I looked, we were, let's see, we're got to be like 350. We got to be near 100 probably.
So I share that to say
It's a full year if I did it every year now.
Exactly.
I mean, every day, every year. I think that's what I'm up against. It's amazing I've had that many discussions, but man, you talk about learning. That's why I keep doing it. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, it's about continuous learning. So we're talking about what is, let's say enterprise good AI look like in production. I think it's important to recognize that the problem isn't the intelligence of these models. You brought up frontier models, the lab innovation that's occurring. It's really about how do you have replays of the work that's being done. So when you look at the advent of generative AI, fundamentally, and people see it, keep talking about it, whether it be on the internet and panels and topics, that it's probabilities. So I talk about some math and stuff I did in school, but understanding that there's probabilities under the hood of every question and answer pair that you're using on Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude, etc., IBM's Granite, recognizing that shows that you aren't going to get the consistent answer, right? If me and you go to the same system, IBM's tools, and we ask a Watson XAI to Granite 8 billion parameter model question about how to keep the lights on, right? That's very generic, but we're going to get two different answers and two different runtimes. And so that idea of having a show your work environment, back to school, labs, classrooms, this is where I try to bridge the left and right side of my brain of like what's going on in academia where people are excited about, but then really what's going on at companies. Well, people are rushing to get the newest and latest model. Today is a Monday. What model is out that I can test out? I think that's important for innovation, for research and development, but you're unable to kind of go to production with that because there's not traceability. So certain workflows require that level of rigor, not just from a statistical math perspective, but also from an audit perspective. I work a lot with financial services industry clients, or if you look at healthcare and legal, there's certain regulations tied to what data is going in, conversations you're having, and then is that repeatable if there is an audit clause back on that other end. So I think this is a long way of saying how Raffi, maybe it's not IBM's views here, it's really my personal perspective is there needs to be not just that third element of guardrails and evaluation, there needs to be replayability at scale. And that really has to do, like right now you asked, how many times have you talked about enterprise AI? And sure, you could do a keyword search. We could look at this tool, but how would we go to production with that instance? And are we going to just drag and drop that into a model, with a cloud under the hood that you don't really know is being managed? But in this enterprise section where maybe there's IP, maybe there's personally identifiable information, we want to make sure that it's contained, replayable, and so on. And that's when the open source, that's where academia and a lot of interesting insight has come in, and how that then fuses into companies is important. But it's also important to recognize the innovation of these models, and you're almost getting behind if you're not testing them out at home, to solve problems, whether it be within your personal life or otherwise. I think there's value in certain workflows. So replayability is that.
How do you define replayability? I mean, obviously the simple answer is going to be you hit a model. Are you suggesting that it should give you the same answer 2 times in a row, always?
In certain context, it should. But back to the question I asked about, like, how do you turn the lights off or keep them on? I mean, that's a very general question. I define it in enterprise contexts of replaying the decision when someone asks you to show the work. So it's really back to the long-winded way of answering. It's really what you just said, which is the same answer, the same input giving you the same output. That's not necessary for every case of AI or generative AI, but in some workflows where you're looking at, anti-money laundering, I just used my credit card. My girlfriend got a charge from a company that in West Village, New York City last night, where we're at home. How that's being tracked, that may not need to touch generative AI, but in the case it does, if there is an LLM, within the workflows and those anomalies being tracked, it needs to be consistent. And is Gen AI the solution? No, AI is not the solution to everything. But in that case of where there wants to, there's the infusion of models where the user maybe is touching it, the technology is touching it one shape or another, you need the same input to give you the same output.
I think you said it right. I mean, the first observation I have in your comments, and thank you for that, is that it depends on the context. If it's a fact, then it should have met with consistency.
I got you with a fact. This is something that I see at a lot of research conferences.
Yep.
I think it's relevant, is just what's the capital of France? It's going to be Paris, 100% of the time. And I think there's a metric there.
I think it should be consistent there. But the reality is, the funny thing to me is this, and I'd like your observation, I've been thinking about this lately, is that we hold AI and machines much more accountable than we hold humans. Meaning, if they make a mistake, we're like, oh, you made a mistake. But humans, we'll get the capital of France even wrong many times, and maybe even say it with authority, and we'll give them a pass. I mean, AI will revolutionize the world. I think everybody agrees with that. The question is when. One of the major inhibitors is just humans getting in the way because they don't trust it. They want 100% on everything, which I get it. You know, you don't want it to drive off the road, an autonomous car. But right now, today, Waymo, I think I've looked, and look, I'm not an advocate or a speaker of Waymo by any means here. I was looking at the statistics. The statistics are fantastic. I mean, it's safer than any human. But if it gets in the wrong lane at one time, everybody goes, oh my God, these things are terrible. We can't be using this. It reminds me, let me tell you a little story I heard recently, and I think it's very similar. And this is why I think we're also going to have humans in the loop to get other humans to adopt some of this stuff, is because, you know, the Otis elevator, any elevator, you're going to see Otis somewhere on that. And look, this started out with, I think it was Alicia Otis or something like that, is a different name, invented the elevator in like in 1850s, right? He invents his elevator. And remember, this was improving elevators at the time that were just pulley systems. And if the pulley breaks, it's a bad outcome. That's all there is to it, right?
It can't happen.
So he says, we should have some redundancy, right? So he invented his elevator, state of the art, but nobody will get on it because they don't trust it. So he thinks about it, and I'm oversimplifying here. But then he said, all right, I'm going to do three things. One is I'm going to put a mirror in the elevator. So when everybody goes in, they see themselves, maybe distracted by themselves. I think that's a good touch, make it more personable. Secondly, I'm going to put music in the elevator, make it a little bit entertaining. And the third is I'm going to put an elevator attendant in there. And then when they put the elevator attendant in there, then everybody would get on the elevator because they're like, well, this guy's brave enough to write it, so I'll do it. It's almost like we're going through some of those same transformations that we're going to have to bring humans along. All the more reason I think you have to have humans in the loop. But the reason I thought of that story is, as you're talking about replay, I don't think you get the same answer from humans, what I'm kind of saying many times, unless it's a fact like France and they know it. You should get more. I don't disagree. Don't get me wrong. But then the question is what's good enough in replay? Does it have to be 100%? I guess is the question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I really like the elevator kind of history because you brought up a person, a pulley, a safety lever, a couple of, let's say, factors that made, me or an individual comfortable to walk into it. We're facing that with AI that, you hear these buzzwords like there's an agent calling a tool and there's a harness. The harness, like you're getting on a horse, right? And it's protecting you so you're not running away and jumping off the horse. But in the elevator context, having that's those safety individuals in comfort then allows for one to jump on. And your question was, does it have to be 100% correct or 100% consistent? No, but different workflows need different trust standards. And I think when I was talking about finances or transactions, sometimes, at IBM, we like talking about 5 nines, 99.999% for transactions to always run. But with AI, that's not what we're looking for. I think folks are quick to just use the latest and greatest models. And I think that's key, where it's innovation. There's inefficiencies to all of our workflows, both at home, I shared, as well as, planning a trip, whatever it may be, or in the work context and so on. But there needs to be an understanding of what are those evaluations. And it doesn't just need to be the data scientist who's understanding it. I think a perfect example is, this isn't perfectly accurate. Actually, it's very far from that. But I have, like, in a lot of my memory, let's say an large language model tools memory, I have a statement that says, always put a confidence interval at the bottom. I mean, it's pretty, like I said, this is a pretty bad example because the large language model, that's a probabilistic system. It's not deterministic. It's not consistent, is telling me, hey, the confidence is 0.9 or the confidence is 0.6. But why I like this, so this is large language model as a judge, which I would also argue, like I said, isn't the best way of approaching accuracy and evaluation, but it's one way. The thing that I like about it is, if the large language model is not as confident in what it's providing, or it didn't give me the resources as I kind of placed in the memory, I'm noticing that it will say 0.7, and then it's going to make me look at that answer. And sure, there's maybe insight, there's a lot of creativity. It told me Paris is, it actually named a couple of other cities in France, south of France, let's say. And so at least I can go into it a little skeptical. And I think when you look historically at technology innovation, the printer was released. It's awesome. You print out a document. Everyone thought that document is 100% accurate because it's paper. Same thing with the internet in the 2000s. All of a sudden there's a .com or a website, a .org, and everything that's posted there is real. I think people have adjusted, but it's about the infrastructure too, because what we're seeing when you look at these benchmarks is the model result differs more when the infrastructure is changing under the hood. And with hyperscalers, it's great. There's a ton of investment in actual data centers and hardware across the globe, but it's not managed by individuals. So you see this trend in the last month of Mac Minis going up stock wise in terms of people purchasing. If I go to the city Apple store, I'm sure it would be sold out, or at least heavily talked about. It's because people are interested in having that hardware, whether it be this Mac I'm running here with the model running on it, or like a Mac Mini or desktop. So I think I wanted to jump from the accuracy conversation, then quickly going in like, well, how do you measure the output? Humans aren't perfect, as you said, but I think, and it's not just my, let's say Raffi's opinions here. It's research back too. We researched last year around answers and consistency, and we were able to see smaller models were better at providing the consistent answers. Were those answers right? I would argue more than not, no. That was probably the biggest question I got at research conferences was, hey, you're saying you run a Granite 8 billion parameter model, or even an OpenAI OSS, the open source software 20 billion parameter model, and you get 70, maybe 80, 90% consistency in answers for 100 runs. When you look at 120 billion parameters or frontier, you have a lack of consistency. So there's been runs and data and experiments to back that from our end, and other researchers have expanded that to evaluations. And that's something I've been working on doing too. How do you actually measure that Paris being the factual capital of France? And I think the guardrails, harnesses, all these words kind of come together of like looking at historical trends and technology disruption. And I might have rambled a bit there, but I think it's really about bringing that elevator reality to the AI age of 2026 and all.
First of all, you started out, I don't think you mentioned this earlier. Did you worked in services for a while, right? Expert Labs.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
How long were you there?
I was there for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, so you did a lot of services, essentially. Now you're that account technical leader dedicated to a strategic enterprise client. So the question is first and foremost, relative to what you've seen, what does it actually take to design AI systems that work in production? If you're to summarize, what have you seen be the most successful?
I think if you zoom out, it's really understanding what are the priorities of the business and how can you get quick wins. And you mentioned small pilots and examples, but how do you really assess the different workflows that are going on and assess that it's low risk, medium risk, and high risk? If it's the financial transaction one that I brought up where it needs uptime and all of a sudden it's touching Gen AI, that's going to be risky. So how I've seen success is starting with those lower risk areas. And you see, what's a good example of a low risk use case? Well, I'll go back to 9 years ago when I started at IBM with kind of natural language processing and supervised machine learning. I was working with call centers. It was actually with an automotive company. And we had 500 call transcripts at the time. And this is pre-transformer paper that Google had just released, I think 2017, but it was not adopted. That was around language translation. So there was innovation in the field, back to in research and academia, but it wasn't applied at the enterprise footprint. And it was also a lot of it was behind closed doors. That example of call centers having 500 transcripts was great because we were able to extract, think of Control F keywords, come up with entities and understand positive, negative sentiment. And we had some good, insight. Actually, the client readout was like, hey, this was one of the best engagements we've had with IBM. But what was interesting was there was not a cloud strategy at that client at the time. So they weren't able to move forward. So what's changed from then to now is, well, generative AIs and these models have been super innovative that you can create synthetic or like data that is using a Python library like Faker or open source tool, or there's a suite of ways you can do it. And the thing that's changed, I guess, is the call center use case that was so popular when I started in AI and automating, having transcriptions, then being able to have an actionable dashboard or notification to the end users, agent assist, and so on, is even more relevant now because it's low risk. There's already teams that are automated some of this work, and it's not fully automating, it's augmentation. Your question was, how do you kind of get going with clients, or what I've seen? And the services route is, we used to always look for the most data, having the most optimal scenario, running discovery workshops, understanding the as-is pain points of a client or enterprise user. The reality is, a lot of this information, expertise, there's certain experts within companies that hold a lot of knowledge that if you spend time with them from a lunch, a coffee chat, you're able to now prescribe that into a certain workflow and understand, hey, this sits in the low risk, or maybe this is medium risk, but let's start using a large language model infused within that flow. So there's a long way of saying the pilots that are working is really going to start with a cloud first. People say software as a service is moving away, but the reality is it's growing, because if I can log in, just like I logged into this tool that we're recording this podcast on, and I just click a button to sign up, that's going to be valuable for enterprises at scale. That's not how you go to production, but it's important to get, the value quick win for low risk.
Here's what I got from that. Start small, go with use cases that are fully vetted, like call center, that others have already seen success and they've been out there a bit, but overall have a strategy. Even you can have like a end state strategy, and then start small and then start building. All right, I got it. So you also mentioned small models versus large models. Tell me just a little bit more, break that up a little bit. If you're an enterprise, should be using one, the other, both? What have you seen?
Yeah, similar to what we're seeing, and myself seeing in the industry, is everyone talks about multi-cloud, meaning you have third-party vendors, you have data running in different workflows in different cloud environments. There needs to be a multi-model strategy. Multimodal is more so, let's say, the video versus text versus pictures. But the multi-model strategy, I think, is key. And it's key because the innovation is occurring so fast, both from a frontier perspective as well as an open source and small language model perspective. Just a week or 2 weeks ago, Alibaba's Qwen 3.5 new model was released, and the amount of videos, I haven't tested it since I have a pretty old iPhone, but the amount of videos I've seen of people running that model, that sub 1 billion parameter model, there's a 1 million parameter model, seeing those run on an iPhone off air gap, meaning no Wi-Fi, airplane mode, quote unquote, is impressive, because now you're looking at technology that, whether it's running on the iPod or iPhone, or people talk about, I said Mac minis, there's hardware like Raspberry Pis that you can run a model on. The fact that you can do that is not only innovative, but it's secure. So you as a company and an individual, let's say in my case, a technical enthusiast, you need to have a point of view. And I think it's important to experiment and look at that, because there's times where the largest model that may cost a lot of money for every question and tool call may not make sense. If you're able to do, it's called grep, a keyword sort of search of your file system when you're using a coding tool with a smaller model or without even a model, it's important to understand that. So I think it's having a multi-model approach of both open source and smaller, as well as larger frontier models for these long tasks that you may run overnight reviewing code base. Frontier models are going to have advantages, but there's going to be a lot of cost to that. And a lot of them are also funded on the back end from a lot of venture money. So it's understanding, if you're able to run something on your own infrastructure, that may cost money in the short term because you're investing in infra, but in the long term, you're really understanding the components. And I know at the beginning we talked about system design, but what does an end-to-end system look like for technology? I think we're in a unique position with not just the advent of generative AI, but the advancement in both open source innovation, that anyone can kind of download, install these GitHub repos, these code repositories, run a model in certain settings. And a year ago, I didn't think you could run something on a phone this quickly. I thought it may take another 6 months, another 2 years. So seeing that advancement, I think, is key. And then back to frontier, it's important to stay close to the innovation, kind of the groundbreaking. I will say a lot of coding, I don't want to call it solved, but a lot of coding has really been improved from a refactoring and explainability perspective that I don't think people guessed as much a year ago.
So I got the small versus large models. Preferably, clients today, it may not be this way forever, but they'd have like a model router. Otherwise, the expense can be unattainable. You mentioned infrastructure earlier. Let's talk about infrastructure. What infrastructure or what choices should clients be making based on their infrastructure spend, or subscription, rental, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Also, the model router thing is super interesting. I think there's a lot of projects around that, and that's a unique way to test things out. But with regards to infrastructure, it depends on the current spend. It's like really understanding where we were talking earlier, how do we pick a good use case for AI, understanding the prioritizations of the business and then the technology spend that's going on. If there's already hardware invested in data centers, not every client has that, but large enterprises, Fortune 500 companies, again and again, require some of that, whether it be regulation focused, of having that uptime and consistency. So understanding what the footprint is key, because a lot of the times with the investment in hardware, whether that be storage for failovers, we always hear about outages, whether it be cloud outages or a website going down. How do you have the backup files saved and disaster recovery, or it be IBM mainframes for transactions? It's important to understand what's the footprint that a company has. In terms of recommendation for infra, one is the historical context of spend, but then two is recognizing the future isn't defined. I don't have a crystal ball. I could predict that what company is going to be leading, what model is going to be the best. And I think earlier I was trying to say it's really not about the intelligence. It's more about, in some cases, the replayability and the consistency of the infra. So having a perspective on what are ways to get models up and running faster is important, because the challenge of having hardware and running, let's say, AI inferencing on that specific hardware. Let's go zoom out of the enterprise landscape and go to consumer, because I do tend to think personally that consumer trends then relate and cross over to enterprise trends. So when you look at the Mac Mini growth, all of a sudden people want to run 2-3 weeks ago OpenClaw on a Mac Mini, right? A new AI tool, a new buzz. But I don't want to just say it's a new buzz. It's the fastest growing kind of GitHub repository since the Linux Foundation's initial growth. So seeing that usage is important, but that trend of having a Mac Mini to run a model on is a concept that's worth exploring. I wouldn't say in an enterprise setting that makes sense. It makes sense to then have structural, whether it be IBM or other hardware vendors that you're partnering with, to understand what are the components, because there's maintenance and day two services that are associated with data centers across the board. But how do you have small scale test environments in your innovation labs, in your research and development groups, so that you can get the latest and greatest of open source? Because it is easier than one would expect to set some of these things up today, and it's only getting easier. People have shared, the gaps in touching some of this tech, and I earlier was saying, hey, just go SaaS to get some quick wins, and I think that's valid. But at the same time, you don't want to miss out on some of the open source innovation, because security is core. When you're able to manage the environment, you're setting up the guardrails, you're building up the elevator fully, you're setting up the individual in it, the safety levers. Whereas when you're working with a third-party vendor, there's not that fail switch that you can call over, that disaster recovery. It's less consistent, and you really have to dig under the hood to understand the clauses working and sharing data with that company. High level, I think invest in some infra is the short term thing.
Why do you keep referencing Mac Minis? You must be on to the Mac Mini right now. I mean, I got a Mac M2 right now. It's getting old, but I run models on here, and other the small models, right? I have Granite, Gemini, Gemma, and Llama. That's what I have.
Yeah, it's a good question. Should be a salesperson, but that's why I said Raspberry Pi 2, because you could probably get that cheaper on Amazon or online, which is another way to run it. The reason people are talking about it in the field, in let's say in the developer world, versus just running it on your laptop, is to then have a separate control. So if you're allowing a piece of infrastructure then to tie to your desktop, let's go back to the elevator, the stop button, or the lever that you have to pull down to stop due to a fire or some situation occurring. You need to have a fail switch. So I can turn my laptop off, but with a Mac Mini, there you can prescribe it more controls. So instead of it going rogue on your file, sending emails, moving files around on the desktop, you can kind of give it certain controls in terms of how it's accessing your computer and third-party systems within it. The reason you would do that instead of your laptop, I mean, there's two things as well, is also you're getting more compute power. So I have an M2 as well. It's pretty powerful versus my Intel chip Mac that I had previously. I'm able to run some larger models than I was before. But as I mentioned, you're still contained, and there's almost, I don't want to say you're lacking controls. You can still set up those guardrails on your computer, but people are highly interested now in this level of security of having a separate piece of hardware that you can manage remote. So I guess this is a good way to put it. I went to the barber yesterday, and I'm able to run, let's say, that piece of hardware while I leave my Mac, and I'm able to do so through my phone that's tied to the Mac Mini through, let's say, an OpenClaw situation, or there's some remote tooling in other vendors as well. And that's just an example versus touching directly on the desktop and keeping it running all the time.
What guardrails are you implementing right now, and how do you go about it?
There's a lot of ways to look at metrics. Guardrails are really going to depend on the workflows and use cases, but it's important at the core. Earlier, I just said a confidence score. That's pretty general in terms of how you're talking about technology and flows, but looking at things that one are already built. So there's phrases out there that are worth double clicking on and researching. Semantic entropy. Think of the relevance of if you're going to ask a LLM questions and you provide it documentation, finding the relevant ground truth material in the documentation. That's a good metric. Faithfulness is another one that's been around for a while, and that is, I wouldn't say these are necessarily guardrails. They're ways to measure, right? Think of a large language model as math and linear algebra, some statistics too, and probability. How do you set up then thresholds for if it reaches a certain metric that it's successful? So faithfulness, if I zoom out, that is the perfect example where the Paris and France, Paris being the capital of France, comes up. That is something that, there's a lot of open source ways of measuring your LLM output. And I'm not the one to decide that metric. Like I said, the confidence threshold of 90.9 or the semantic entropy or faithfulness. But I think it's really important for the business stakeholder to understand those metrics and then also be the one to set up their risk tolerance. Think of when you're deploying large language models at a client site or in an enterprise, there needs to be, you said, guardrails. And it's going to be tough for just the vendor, partner, trusted advisor, or the internal technical team to say, hey, I'm willing to sign up for 90%, or I just want to sign up for if it's 99% right or 99% tied to the initial material and documentation you shared it. So it's really important to look at it almost in this financial advisor sort of situation. If I'm meeting with a financial advisor, I have a risk tolerance. And if that risk tolerance is low, then I would like that metric to be set in terms of all buys and sells that are going on. So I think it's important for a business stakeholder to take a liking and interest into the evaluation metrics and kind of set that criteria.
Awesome. Hey, look, here's what I'd like to do to end with some rapid fire questions. What these are is like, I'll give you a question, answer like in 1 minute or less. What's the difference between a cool demo and a system that really holds up in a real world production scenario?
A demo will be flashy. It'll get some users to engage and potentially ask questions. A system that holds up in production doesn't just have replayability, but also has been fail-safe.
What did you learn in services, Expert Labs, services that shapes the way you think about technology design?
Starting in the field allowed me to spend time from a design thinking perspective of understanding clients' pain points and recognizing that every client, every end user of technology has different perspectives. So the biggest thing I learned was to listen, active listening. I almost want to be more interested than interesting when I'm showing up to conversations.
What trade-offs matter most when you're building for production at enterprise scale?
Trade-offs are going to be speed versus reliability and momentum, recognizing the frontier advantages of new models, but also the controls that we were talking about earlier. So speed versus the momentum and trends.
Where does AI genuinely help, and where do humans need to stay in the loop?
AI helps with mundane tasks, whether it be looking at certain data. You can anonymize that before going into an AI model to help it with your Excel tools or tracking. Humans need to be in the loop with math. It's getting better. Geometry and some of these things. I know I said LLMs are math, but physics, it's not great. And there's still rooms of improvement in some deeper physics 3 areas that you took in school.
What's coming next in enterprise technology that leaders should pay attention to?
Back to the consumer trends shaping some enterprise trends, I think this return to infra. Not saying having full data centers that are growing in investment. There makes sense to have hyperscalers managing some environments, but having small test environments where you do own infra and those resources to then manipulate it and have those controls in place for production and testing.
What does a person that's relatively young in your career, you still got a long way to go, what do you tell your girlfriend, as you mentioned earlier, when it comes to AI? But what would you tell her that you wouldn't tell anybody else? What worries you? What are you planning for? What are you excited about?
Yeah, she tells me to stop talking about it.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. So what did you say to make her say that?
No, I think it was just my passion before I put pen to paper. That was maybe a year ago. I would say I would recommend not just researching, but putting out content. Writing without AI is actually really good because I think a lot of us don't do that anymore. So if you're able to put pen to paper, do that. And then also code has really reached a level of completion that with some of these new models that I think is impressive. And with code moving so fast. I think everyone can almost become, I don't want to say a scaled developer, but
What's true and nobody agrees with you on?
that's a good question. What's true and nobody, the future of AI being kind of personalized and on iPhones, I think most people think that it's going to be like this artificial general intelligence answering all physics questions. I think that spend is too much, and we'll have human, sure, sort of PhD intelligence, but I do think we'll have personalized ones.
Fantastic, man. Thank you for being here. This has been a good chat. I just like racking your brain a little bit. Anything else you'd leave? What do you do for fun? That's one I didn't ask. What do you do for fun?
That's a good one. I love music. So I mentioned I had kind of background music blogging.
Yeah. What do you do? What do you play?
So I play vinyls. I DJ a lot. And
Oh, really?
so previously used a lot of digital equipment, and I'm kind of going more old school with analog and collecting records. So that's something I do to pass the time and keep things interesting. I like music a lot.
But do you play, when you DJ, do you play vinyl?
Yeah, that's been the most recent, like last 2 years things. Before that, I had, a USB and digital equipment, which I still do. But yeah, I'll bring out a crate.
And where do you DJ?
I live in Brooklyn, so local places. Actually, I have a friend that I'm going to plug is opening a nice cocktail bar called End of Love in Williamsburg. So maybe I'll start once that they get their licenses, move forward. And
But so is that to say you go to bars or restaurants to do this?
yeah, like it's recently I've definitely spent more time researching doing AI things. But in the last 5 to 10 years, I've done it at like rooftop bars and hotels and that sort of thing.
Where's the best place to buy a reasonably priced vinyl in New York?
That's a good question. You got to go to like the mom and pop shops.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to find one.
Yeah, Village Revival or something somewhere over there. In Greenpoint, there's a couple of stuff on Norman Ave. I love Dreamfish Tackle. It's a vintage store. The guy just collects vinyls every other week.
And what kind of vinyls are you buying?
Buying pretty funky vinyls, and what I mean by that is I like kind of went through this Habibi funk phase. My parents are from Beirut, Lebanon, so I kind of got some sounds from that region from like the 70s, 80s, things of Jimi Hendrix and Lebanese or Moroccan. So that's pretty weird. And then Japanese fusion like jazz. That's been the two trends.
That's awesome, man. All right, where do you live now? You live in Brooklyn right now?
Live in Brooklyn now, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Raffi, thank you for being here. I greatly appreciate it, man. Raffi Khatchadourian, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate you. Appreciate your call. Everybody, thanks for listening. Hit us on almartintalksdata@gmail.com. Again, we'd always love to hear from you. Rate us. Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.